Thanks so much for coming out on this Tuesday night, a beautiful, balmy autumnal evening. Very soon we're going to be able to see the lights light up for Vivid, so we're excited that you're going to be turning this way and then enjoying that view after we finish this discussion today. My name's Rowe. I'm a Triple J broadcaster. I also hosted the screen review series The Critics on ABC iView. I host a little podcast called Bang On with Miff Warhurst, and I'm a massive fan of Ratbags. So I'm very excited about being here with you tonight and talking to a bunch of what I hope will be Ratbags here on the stage. Before we go further though, I'd like to welcome to the stage Yvonne Weldon to welcome us to country. Yvonne?
Good evening, ladies, gentlemen, sisters and brothers. My name is Yvonne Weldon. I am a Wiradjuri woman originally from Cowra here in New South Wales. I'm the elected chairperson of the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, who are the Aboriginal Cultural Authority under the Aboriginal Land Rights Act for the land we are meeting on. Welcome to country is an age-old tradition, something that has existed for many generations before us, as it will for many generations to come. In keeping with tradition, tonight I bring a message of acknowledgement of the people and the land of the Eora Nation. I bring a respect and recognition of the Eora Nation's culture and identity, promoting a vision of working together as one community and achieving as one community. I pay my respects to all elders, past and present, and to all First Nations and non-First Nations people here tonight. The Eora Nation's country covers the Hawkesbury River in the north, the Nakkiah in the west, and the Georges River in the south. On behalf of the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, the elders and the members, I welcome everyone to Gadigal land, and I acknowledge Gadigal people whose spirits and ancestors will always remain with this land, our Mother Earth. My people have been a part of this land for more than 60,000 years. We are the oldest living culture of the world, and we will continue to maintain the land and our practices for another 60,000 years at least. Aboriginal culture and our customs has a strong inclusion and importance of sharing and enhancing what we live and what we know, but never sacrificing our people and our traditions in achieving this. Our practices have sustained us throughout the generations, and it is embedded into the core of this land. And to give recognition to the survival and the challenges being faced by my people, could you all please pause for a moment to remember the many sacrifices that have been made along the way, the ones we will continue to make, and the ones we shouldn't have to. This is Reconciliation Week, and during this time, which commenced last week, we have milestones to reflect upon. National Sorry Day and the anniversaries of bringing the Home Report, the Mabo decisions and the 1967 referendum. Since the referendum and some of the recognition along the way, there is still much more to be done. The lessons that have been learnt at our expense and our devastation should and must be acknowledged, not out of guilt, but to listen, learn and come together, to heal and to prevent the heartache from ever happening again. As we connect, learn and share today, tomorrow and beyond, don't lose sight of the important work that still needs to be done to continue to bring my people, your people and our people together. We can all bring about a positive change for this country now and into the future. To make that future possible, let us all draw upon my people's spirits as we continue on our journey. May my people's spirits walk with you and guide you as we strive forward for us all. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Thank you and have a wonderful evening.
And tonight's event is an event that's been put on by Create New South Wales, which you can see that little logo there. I think something you're going to be seeing a lot more events here in Sydney. It's the New South Wales Government New Arts and Cultural Driver, which brings together arts, screen, culture in a new integrated entity all in one, and really invests in the success and the future of the arts, in screen culture throughout New South Wales through infrastructure, policy and funding programs. The organisation is committed to growing, empowering and strengthening the arts and screen culture sectors in New South Wales and really embed arts in the everyday and deliver new, innovative and exciting arts and cultural services and experiences for the people of New South Wales. Hopefully some of the things we're going to discuss as we look into the future of life and art on screen today. We do have artists from here in Sydney and beyond in regional New South Wales as well. All of them really produce work that is rooted in local community but tells a much bigger story that reflects both the Australia that we are right now and maybe the Australia that we want to be in the future. And we will visit through the night some of the recent projects that these artists have been working on, as well as find out what they demand from themselves as both artists and as agitators in Australia in 2017. Alison Page is a leading force in the Australian design scene, championing Aboriginal identity in interiors, public art, jewellery, installations and film. She is a descendant of the Walbanga and Wadi Wadi people of the Yuin Nation and has appeared for 8 years as a regular panellist on ABC TV's The New Inventors. Alison was inducted into the Design Institute's Hall of Fame in 2015, and her most recent work is as a producer with media company Zach Page, making innovative cultural documentaries and drama, including the short film Bacala, which we're going to be seeing a bit tonight. Please make her welcome. I feel like I'm on a game show all of a sudden. The price is right. Vic McEwan, to my left here, is the Artistic Director of the CAD Factory, an artistic organisation and studio based in regional New South Wales. And in 2015, Vic was the Artist in Residence at the National Museum of Australia and the recipient of the inaugural Arts New South Wales Regional Fellowship. One of the key areas of Vic's interest in art is exploring difficult themes within the lived experience of diverse communities and also localities. He also sits on the inaugural New South Wales ACT Arts Health State Leadership Group and is a board member of Music New South Wales. Nakkiah Lui, just next to Nick, is a writer for theatre and television, a proud Gamilaroi and Torres Strait Islander woman from Mount Druitt. She's an associate playwright in residence at Belvoir, and in 2013 was the artist in residence at Griffin Theatre. And in 2012, Nakkiah was the inaugural recipient of the Dreaming Award from the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Arts Board of the Australia Council, and the inaugural recipient of the Balnaves Foundation Indigenous Playwright Award. Nakkiah's new play, Black is the New White, has been playing at the Sydney Theatre Company and continues to through June. And she's in the middle of making a new ABC iView series titled Kiki and Kitty. And Ali Kadhim is a self-taught, next to Nakkiah, is a self-taught filmmaker and movement artist. And since high school, Ali has been combining his love of parkour and film to travel the world through live theatre performance, including sword fighting in Cairo. Ali continues to work as a parkour and free running coach for Team 9 Lives in Fairfield and also Stunt Gym in Brookvale, and spends any spare time screenwriting and action designing. Right now, he's writing a number of action genre feature films, a number of them.
Yeah,
how many?
I lost count.
Okay.
No, there's like five.
Maybe we'll get a bit of a taste of that tonight.
Yeah, hopefully.
So I want to start with a big, scary question. If we're talking about, identity, what is it that forms you as an artist? Nakkiah, what is it that forms your identity as an artist?
For me, I don't really think about my identity as an artist too much. It's more about, the work and the space the work is creating. And for me, I suppose, identity is something that we live and we experience as this culture. And I think, in terms of how that relates to my work, is a lot of my work are questions that I'm asking at the time. Whether it's the use of comedy, whether it's, the topic of a play, it kind of relates to, I guess, questions I have around that, pertain to my lived experience. So I guess, I suppose it's my identity as an artist, but, the art is what I do. This idea of being an artist is something I still feel kind of uncomfortable with.
How come?
It just seems kind of wanky when you tell people. No, because it's, I say I'm a writer and an actor, but, it's just, it's not so much a label as it is something that you do.
Mm. Alison, you've worked in television as a presenter and a panelist, as well as working as an interior designer, kind of more behind the scenes, and now you're making films. Do you see that there's a common thread through all that you do as an artist?
Yeah, totally. I think it totally relates to my cultural values. I think I feel really blessed that I actually made a mistake when I first went to uni and I enrolled in law, business law. And I walked out of my 6-week exams and walked straight over to the design school. But, in some ways I think a lot of young people just stumble into their, whatever they decide to do with life. And I just feel really blessed that I'm in the creative sector, because the Western world is so fucked that, I just feel compelled to do work that, and maybe some people see it as quite didactic, and I don't really care, because I just think I need to kind of make my cultural values stronger, through the work that I do, and I just feel really compelled to do it.
So you're feeling a responsibility to
Totally.
the community that you've come from?
Totally.
Or just the Western world being fucked?
I think it's both.
Yeah.
I think it's a survival mechanism, because it is that thing of, oh, thank God I'm in the arts, and thank God I'm a creative, because, at least that's something that humans do. We tell stories, and it's a beautiful thing. And whatever medium the stories are told in, whatever language the stories are told in, there's a beautiful biological reason why humans tell stories, and I'm glad I'm part of it.
Mm. Vic, did you always know that you wanted to be an artist, and was it part of your identity very early on?
I think some exploration was a part of my identity, and I think what's happened over those years is my identity as an artist is really based on my process, what the process of working is, and that's all about engagement with other human beings and what that sort of situation is. Similarly, when we live in a world that isn't really set up to allow people, doesn't encourage people to fulfill their greater self, really. So, the process of making art for me is a way that the engagement with people to make that work is a really important thing in terms of myself feeling enough value that I should be doing it, and also that the people around me have that value, and therefore then the outcomes, not secondary really to that, but the process of making is core to the identity of how I make, I think.
Ali, your art, excuse me, is, engaged in a lot of play as well, and with you doing parkour and jumping off buildings and stuff, how does that translate to being a work of art and I guess a communication, if we're talking about storytelling as one of the main foundations of art as well?
Yeah, we're carrying stories in our bodies all the time. The world has so many stories. As we're out traveling and jumping and climbing and we're exploring neighborhoods and whatnot, you're discovering stories. So that's a lot of that is the reason what got me into filmmaking in the first place. It was because of my connection to the streets and connection to the community. And you see all these horrible things sometimes in the community, or you read about it in the newspaper every week. There's always something messed up. And it doesn't matter what community you're in, every neighborhood has something going on. And so, in a way, parkour's been the thing that's opened me up, that has opened all of that to me. And you're there, you're on the street, your feet are in the streets, and it's you can see everything, especially if you're up on buildings, you can see everything that's going on below you. So
It seems like a very freeing sense of seeing the world, but are there any rules that govern your practice? Do you still have to abide, the thing with games is that often games have the most rules of all. In parkour, are there rules that govern what you do? And in telling that story?
No rules. There's no rules. We don't believe in that. And the reason why is because parkour originated out of freedom. So in essence, if you're moving, you have to be free. That's the destination, for you to just be absolutely loose. If the minute that you try to, formulate it and that kind of thing, you're doing something different, which is the whole argument in the parkour world in itself at the moment. Some people are trying to structure and that kind of thing for parkour, but it belongs to the people. Anyone can start. You can be doing it no matter how old you are, where you're from,
Yeah,
what
you
neighborhood.
You say that, but really,
No,
you know,
really,
some people
I'll help
just
you. It's
aren't
all right.
physically, like, you know, I don't think I'd be very good at it.
Yeah, we will see one of the videos later on of Ali jumping all over things, and I can just see my ankle breaking in every one of them.
Yeah.
What about you, Alison, particularly in your work in creating Indigenous interior design? Are there rules about what you can and can't do and that govern your practice in that regard? And also in filmmaking as well, about the stories that you're allowed to tell?
Oh, yeah, for a minute there, my head was in the Australian standards and the building code of Australia. No, but I think culturally, you know, I do think the Indigenous space is actually pretty heavily regulated, to be completely honest. And I've seen over the 20 years that go through different stages, and it's sort of ramping up a little bit now, because I think everyone's so keen to follow protocol and do the right thing. But sometimes I see that go a little bit out of control, to the point where I think, you know, I see some really great people wanting to do collaborations, but then, you know, this mountain is put in front of them about, you know, how to go through those protocols and things like that. I mean, it just took me ages in the architecture world particularly. I mean, we designed Nakkiah Hospital, you know, and it took 7 years. It took 7 years to do, you know. And I think, like, as a creative, you learn over time what, you know, how long your projects, you know, what's your time frame. And yeah, over the years, mine's getting less and less. It's quicker and quicker. Move on quicker and quicker.
But you're working with less people as well, aren't you? You're kind of, you know, pulling back and doing your own thing, more autonomous.
Yeah, definitely. And also too, I think it's just really important, if you've got those ongoing relationships with community, it's just a lot easier to, like, navigate that regulated kind of cultural space.
And are you talking about, like, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal collaborations in terms of having to then go through, like, protocol?
Yeah, sometimes I think, yeah, like, but I've just worked with the Preachers, the band, and they've just gone through a process where they've written a really beautiful song where the B chorus is in language. And they've actually they engaged Terry Janke and, you know, went to all the communities, including my community at La Perouse, you know, which was a great thing. And, you know, I see that and I just think that was just so fantastic. But, you know, they just had a really, you know, a great process, and they followed it, and, you know, they stuck to it. But, you know, it kind of meant the band having to get up in front of the community and really put themselves out there and say, you know, how do you feel about white people singing in language? You know, like, really put themselves out there, which I think is a really healthy thing. But I'm sort of talking about too that.
How did they feel, by the way? How did the community feel about that?
Yeah, really positive. And I do
but
find...
we can't, like, the communities they spoke to, not the Aboriginal community across Australia.
No, that hasn't been released, no.
Yeah.
But
and why did they want to do it in language? Because some would argue that that's cultural appropriation.
yeah, not if you follow... We'll see that, and that's the thing about following the processes and, you know, getting the right permissions and, you know, going to the elders about the use of the language, how is it done properly, am I using it right, and, you know, going through all of that process. But I think that's a really progressive co-creation, you know, and, you know, I think it was really well received within our communities anyway. And, you know, what was really good about it as well was that it stimulated a lot of conversation about language, which in our communities we're just trying to revive.
Well,
yeah.
Nakkiah, you're telling a lot of stories, you know, about contemporary Indigenous lives, black comedy, a case in point, which is something that I don't think we'd ever seen before on Australian television. How do you kind of contribute within that greater narrative? Like, are you thinking... What's your starting point when you're starting to write those pieces for screen and thinking, who is my audience here? Am I trying to bridge a gap? Like, where do you begin?
Yeah, the thing about black comedy was that they did a pilot of a show called Basically Black back in I do believe it was like the early 70s, with people like Gary Foley and Bob Mazza, and it's absolutely genius. You can go look it up on YouTube. I highly recommend you do it. It's called Basically Black. Some really great sketches. And they did this pilot, and it didn't. They were too far before their time. And how that sketch came about, and I'll just give a bit of a history because it does inform my work, is how basically Black came about was they started a thing called the National Aboriginal Theatre. And that was part of the Aboriginal civil rights movement back, in the 60s through to the 70s. And what they found is that they could go out and they would protest through theatre. And so they'd be doing shows during the night and then getting locked up during the day, or getting locked up after the show. They'd have to get them released during the day to come and do the show in the evening. It was really it was stuff about creating space. And how they did that and how they performed their activism was through art. And it was through doing. And so after that, they'd been talking about, an Aboriginal sketch comedy show for decades. And I just happened to be, around at the right place and the right time. There was an advertisement that was sent out back in 2013. I just started writing, so I did law. Kind of discovered a bit too late that I really hated it, and decided I was going to be a theatre writer. And this ad went out. My mum showed it to me. It was like, "Are you a black fella? Do you think you're funny?" All black fellas, we all think we're funny, so we kind of send it in. Right. And then I sent this video of me doing a strip called A Culturally Appropriate Guide to Stripping. It could have went really wrongly now that I think about it, but luckily I got the job. And so for me, what I do, I'm still hugely inspired and humbled by the Black canon that those people who started the National Black Theatre left for me. I have great opportunity because of that. So for me, creating work like Black comedy, especially, creating work, for instance, where you can make people laugh and that we're not just portraying representations of Aboriginal tragedy. For me, it's about creating space in a discourse, asking questions that weren't usually there before, being able to, really try and get people to work that empathy muscle, because I think, actions don't change until our thoughts do.
You touched on that a little bit last night, very briefly on Q&A. For anybody who saw, there was a fantastic episode last night of Q&A. One of the rare times I actually watched it because it doesn't drive me nuts. And Nakkiah was on the panel and you were talking about the importance of creating the myth and being part of the story. How does that feed into your writing? Is it always part of what you do? If you're talking about the Indigenous myth, the Indigenous story, Indigenous Australia.
Yeah, I think, there's my Aboriginality is a huge part of who I am, and it's always going to be a filter in which I've seen the world. It's how I grew up. You can't divorce your identity or your lived experience from your past or your community, So for me, for myself, am I contributing to, I hope the story we're telling about, Aboriginality in this country? Yeah, but I hope I'm contributing to the Australian discourse as well. And increasingly, more of a globalist discourse. There's been a huge solidarity between diasporas that have been marginalised and don't have the power values of, colonial power structures, so the States, the UK, Australia, just those off the top of my head, right? Not limited to. So I feel definitely I'm a part of that story. Black comedy has a huge fan base. I don't know how they watch it. I don't want to speculate. I feel like it might be illegal and I'll get in trouble. But, it has a really big fan base within, Native Americans and Native Aboriginal Canadians.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so that's pretty interesting. But I think it's about... I think so often, especially with nationalism and contextually looking at politics now and this idea of nationhood and statehood, so often what that means is that the story of who we are as a community is enforced on us. And so I think it's really important that your work is, as an artist, for myself, the art I love has merit within contributing to that discourse and contributing to, our community storytelling and who we are and why we are and how we became. So for me, it's important.
I want to touch on that importance, I guess, of having real world outcomes as well through the screen and show you just a little bit of the film that Alison's working on at the moment. I mentioned it before, Buckler. I think we'll just watch a little bit of it and then have a chat about what she's working on right now.
Berapa?
Angaya, Ajurunga, Magalda, Agadena, Urajija, Inungangwa, and then I only Bamba, Angaya, where Lanmumule.
Alison, tell us a little bit about Bakala. What are we watching?
Bakala, you just watched Bakala have a moment. His name's Steve Bakala Warramara. He's from Groote Eylandt, which is in East Arnhem Land. He's suffering from a neurodegenerative disease called Mercado-Joseph disease, which was brought over several hundred years ago by the Chinese explorers and passed it on to that community. The context, it's just the most insidious disease that nobody really knows about. You basically become a prisoner in your own body. Your brain is completely fine, but eventually you lose all ability to walk and talk. You have 50% chance of passing it on to your children. Even if your children don't get it, they're still carriers and they've got a 50% chance of passing it on to their kids. And as it's passed on to generation, it becomes more aggressive. So the symptoms come on sooner and death comes on sooner. So it's just awful. And just as a cultural layer, within Groote Eylandt, there's quite high sort of beliefs in black magic. And so there's quite a strong belief that the community, the family that are suffering this have been cursed. So not only are you sort of dealing with, disability in a remote community, but you're also dealing with this stigma of being cursed. So Bakala met Bakala, several years ago, and he had this idea that he wanted to make a film about him trying to find the cure for MJD out in the bush through bush medicines. And so Nick, my collaborator, Nick and I, we just kind of talked to the MJD Foundation. And at the moment the foundation is pretty fully funded by the community. The community themselves put in $1 million of research money to try and find a cure. Even though there's communities all over the world, there's a small pocket of people in China, in Europe and other parts of America that suffer the disease. It's this one tiny little community in East Arnhem Land. They're the only people that are really doing anything about research for this disease. So, we decided to work with the foundation and make a piece of art that could kind of get the story out there, really. So the idea is that we make a 15-minute film, and so we did that over New Year's Eve, really. We all spent that time together and made it together with the community. So, we co-wrote it with Bakala, and it was a pretty lovely experience. So right now, the idea is, and the foundation's, made a dedicated website for it, is to really engage the philanthropic community in Australia, and hopefully in the US through film festivals.
Do you think that you choose visual storytelling because that's something that everyone can understand, that's one art form that everyone gets?
Kind of. I think, one of the reasons why I moved from design to filmmaking is just because it's such a powerful medium. I was trying to tell stories through the built environment, and I still think there's lots of opportunity through augmented reality and the convergence of film and architecture. But I you know, once I think, you know, we were talking about it earlier, like I've got the bug, you know, it's such a powerful medium, it's so wonderful. And, you know, to be really clear about the message that you're trying to tell. You know, I respect artists that like to be more abstract and let people to put their own interpretations, but something like this has a very clear message, and I really want people to get it. And I want people to get on the website and donate.
And give lots of money.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts, so just for anybody as well, on VR, because that's being used increasingly to tell stories? And I think particularly for me, whenever I interact with it, it's a lot more, you know, it gives you a great sense of empathy. You're literally in the story.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on VR as a storytelling mechanism?
Well, it's funny because the empathy thing, you know, it's that conversation I had maybe 10, 15 years ago with Lynette Walworth, and it's, you know, she's also someone who likes to be very clear about her message to her audience. You know, and it's really interesting that her work at the moment is just going off in the VR space. And, you know, she's very interested in people having compassion and empathy. And to have that immersive experience, I think is, you know, it's, you know, if you think about it, I think VR and augmented reality are very indigenous concepts, really, because having the environment sort of literally speak to you is something that we've had in our culture for thousands of years.
Speaking of that immersive sense of storytelling and art, Vic, you do very site-specific work, and we don't have anything to show because what you're working on right now is more to do with sound, and particularly working with sound to help trauma victims in hospitals. Can you give us a brief summary of what you're doing in the UK right now, or you're about to go to the UK to do?
Yes, I go again in 2 days. So I've been travelling to the UK pretty much twice a year for the last 3 years on a project in Alder Hey Children's Hospital. And that project started when I was looking at the research. It shows us that the sound levels in hospital, no hospital in the world has met the World Health Organization standards for sound levels. And so there's a massive research that shows us that sound levels are causing an increase in medication for patients, increase in the length of hospital stays, including you know, disturbed sleep, agitation, all of that sort of stuff. So because the idea of arts and health in the UK has been something that's been happening for a long time, I was invited to go and spend time over a long period of time just to see how a contemporary artist who was interested in sound approach this if he was allowed to spend time in this space. So it's been my 6th or 7th visit, which is the last visit in 2 days, to show some of the outcomes of that. So there's 8 outcomes from that process. One of those is a radio documentary about the process. One is a book written by Clive Parkinson, who's been observing my process, and he's writing that book really about the human experience of having an artist in this space. There's a series of artworks. So part of that, one of the outcomes is they're going to be, I'll be in residence at the Tate in Liverpool in a few weeks, showing some of the outcomes of that work developed in the hospital space, as well as an EP of compositions made from recordings taken in the hospital and a series of other sort of outcomes like that.
And what's the outcome for the patient or the families of the patients? How have they reacted to it?
Well, I think it's been, you know, a long and very various processes. Sometimes I might go into the schools that are in the hospitals and just do workshops with patients, or I might develop long-term relationships with some patients who were there for a very long time. So, you know, for example, one of the most kind of, I think, profound artistic experiences I've had has come through this process. So I was working with a young girl who was 17 and taken into hospital after collapsing at school assembly, and when she didn't know she was ill, when she was taken into hospital, it was discovered she had multiple cancers and they'd eaten part of her spine, so she never walked again from that day. And when she came into hospital, one of the few possessions she brought was her art journals. So we decided when I was in there that we'd work together as collaborators. So instead of me just giving workshops to her or just exploring the sound space, actually working as equal collaborators in a place where, you know, so much of your autonomy, so much of yourself is taken away from you when you're in one of those healing spaces. And this was kind of about giving her back some of her voice, and together we're going on an artistic exploration. So she was an avid photographer, so we took some of her images, and I had some small handheld projectors, and we projected them onto her bed and onto her body and onto her bed and re-photographed those things. And then I was interested in working with some of her internal body sounds, so we had a stethoscope that recorded sound. So I taught her and her mum how to use it, and they did some recordings of her heartbeat. And then I discovered in the Highlands of Scotland there's a place where sound lasts longer than anywhere else on
How
Earth.
did you discover that?
Well, I'm interested in
It's
natural...
like going on a walk one day. Oh, my
the
yell
north
just
of
really
Scotland.
echoed for a long time there.
I think I'm just interested in interesting sounding spaces. So just
Yeah.
researching and reading. kind of discovered this space north of Inverness in Scotland where sound lasts for 2 minutes. So they fired a blank bullet of a gun, and that one bang lasts for 2 minutes in this space. It was only discovered a few years ago, and before that, the longest sounding space was 40-something seconds. So it's a really massive increase. And these were oil tanks that were buried deep in the highlands of Scotland in between World War I and World War II to store enough oil so that if the ports were bombed, they'd have enough oil to fuel the British Navy. So in secret, they dug 6 250-metre long, 40-metre tall tunnels that in total held over 30 million litres of oil in them. And so they're now empty on privately owned property. So at that time, Alicia, who I was working with, she was just entering palliative care, so they decided her treatment wasn't working. And we started talking about what does it mean to take the heartbeat of a girl who doesn't have long left on this earth and play it and re-record it in a place where sound lasts longer than anywhere else. So she became really excited about this idea that when I talked about me travelling up and finding this space and to play it, that she was going to have the longest heartbeat in the world. So we did this recording, and to get into this oil tank, we had to walk 250 metres into a tunnel into the highlands and then be pushed through a 47-centimetre pipe that was 3 metres long and then fall into this oil tank in pitch darkness with battery-powered equipment. And we played single heartbeats, so just boom, boom. But that would last for 2 minutes.
Wow.
And we placed microphones down the space and then did re-recordings. So we, now have these recordings that are single heartbeats. So at the end of that trip, I came back and then 2 weeks later received an email saying she'd passed away. So she never got to hear the heartbeat, this 2-minute sort of recording. But since then, I've sent it to her family, so I'm in contact with her mum and people in her small town in Wales where she's from. And so when I go back, that artwork, this beautiful sound that we would have discussed, what do we do with this now? Where it'll be on exhibition somehow at the Tate, and we're working with her family to see what significance does this now have for people, this sort of sound. So there's been an opportunity to make some really interesting artworks, really sort of through a careful process. And then there's a bunch of practical outcomes. For example, the nurses and doctors would mention to me whenever I work with her that usually at nights it would take maybe a couple of hours to get her to eat her meal, but whenever we'd work together, she would eat. So it meant that whatever battle she was having each night, fighting, even just eating, she was not having that whenever we worked together, whenever we went on some artistic exploration. And so, it had benefits for her in that regard, for the hospital in terms of the staff not having to spend 2 hours to make somebody eat. They can, care for her in other ways.
It seems, listening to you speak about this and knowing this is a collaboration with a bureaucratic organisation like, the UK health system, the NHS, it seems impossible to imagine the same sort of collaboration could happen in Australia. Is this something that's fairly unique, or does any of this, these kind of collaborations with government bodies in those sort of bureaucracies happen in Australia?
Well, I think there's a reason I'm doing it in England, and that's because the idea of arts and health isn't quite as new over there. But also my arts practice in Australia often works with non-arts organisations, so some of that negotiation of the bureaucracy is really at the core of that. And I find that repeatedly it always comes down to the people who are in key positions. So it just so happens that the head of intensive care, who was a first specifically trained intensive care consultant in the UK, she's an avid fan of the arts. So she opened all these doors. So when I went there saying, I want to spend a night shift on intensive care, for example, she made that happen. When I wanted to go into MRI scans when they were happening and meet families and people, she would make that happen. But that very easily could have been shut down if the right person wasn't in that position. I think through the work of the CAD factory that we do, so we've done projects, say, in Sunrise, in their rice mills that have reopened after droughts, for example, and the levels of bureaucracy working with, a bunch of installation artists in a fully functioning 24-hour-a-day rice mill requires a really big negotiation with bureaucracy that is really central to the success of the project.
Yeah, too much cotton wool in Australia, I think.
Yeah.
Ali, you're a teacher as well. I mean, you use art as an education and parkour as an education, and your environment is really central to what you do. You could say all of your art is site-specific. Wherever you are, that is the place of art. I might just show a little bit of a video of what Ali's done, and you can see both what he shoots and also what he is the star of.
Someone bothered me. The Eiffel
So Ali, you're obviously in some of that, and then you're behind the camera for some of it as well.
Yeah, I was. Yeah.
How much of your own identity do you place in the camera's gaze, though? How much of you is it looking out even when you're not in the...
You mean from behind the camera?
Yeah.
Increasingly, it's been a lot lately. I like both. I can't pick. If you ask me to be one or the other, I can't do it.
What kind of director are you?
I want to connect audiences. I want to put audiences there. So for me, that's the kind of feeling that I want people to have. So it's like very POV kind of type stuff, and I want people to be in the action, really immersed, and to have that feeling, that sensation. So what we feel, hopefully the audience feels.
And you can see there the sort of, I'm sure you guys have all heard of parkour before, but it feels like every obstacle is not an obstacle, but it's an opportunity, which could kind of be an analogy for how a lot of artists approach, you know, a lot of brick walls in your life. It's not an obstacle, but an opportunity. Do you see that kind of parallel line of thinking going through the way that you make art?
Definitely. So, like, you mean with obstacles and that kind of...
Yeah, literally and laterally.
Totally. For us, if there were no obstacles, parkour wouldn't exist. So you have to look at it in that sense, and it teaches you a lot on how to look at life, and to take that philosophy on the way that you approach life in itself. People see limitations in the environment, but for us, we see opportunities. And these opportunities are making you stronger, and it's making you better, and it's making you... See, a lot of the time, different artists, they might have a lot of things available to them. And just because you have it doesn't mean you should use it. So I've worked with artists and directors in the past that have every kind of, film tool and equipment and jib and crane and etc. And they use it for the most ridiculous reasons. But just because you have it doesn't mean you should use it. A lot of the stuff that was all handheld, all of that. We had nothing. We were on skateboards. My brother here and my brothers and my partner, they shot those. When I was in it, they shot it for me. And so when you have limitations, you're forced to be creative.
So what's the main thing that you're looking for? If equipment doesn't matter, if you just want to put people inside the story, that point of view, what is the heart of what you do? What story are you trying to tell?
There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff I want to tell. But for me, it's like it's universal. It's what we feel. It's emotions. It's I'm really at the moment into the underdog story. So the story of overcoming great odds, overcoming impossible and crazy, overwhelming impossibilities, and that speaks to me because every single day, we're all dealing with obstacles 1,000,001 ways. So it resonates with people, I hope, but it definitely does for me. So it's like when I see these kind of stories, it inspires me and it wants me to push harder and to work harder and to push myself to become better in whatever way. But at the same time, I think we can learn a lot from just from seeing the environment as something we can use. We don't need to, for example, be in a 24/7 gym, which is not a bad thing. But I mean, we use the streets for free.
Yeah.
And it makes you strong, and yeah, why not?
If you're thinking, I guess, about that dialogue as well, that you're telling a story through physicality, and I know that you're writing a handful of action genre films. I don't know how many, but it sounds like you're very busy.
Yeah.
Are you using that physicality as the language in which you tell the story, that it's more about, the way that you're using the body than necessarily the written dialogue that's on the page?
Yeah, it's a combination of both. It's a bit of both. As we know, actions speak louder than words, but at the same time, words in the right way can have a deep impact at the same time. So I'm not limited to just to the physicality of it. But that's the world that I do know best, and I know how. It's like I wasn't very academically proficient as a kid, right? So But when it came to gravity, we knew gravity very well. And when it came to the human body, we know exactly what the human body can do. That was like our PhD. And when it came to teaching people how to move, we can see their weaknesses, we can see their strengths, and we can elevate that. So taking some of my experience in that and now diving into the film world, it's I'm looking at all my weaknesses and trying to strengthen them up. So
It seems like you have to think very positively in the world that you make art in. Like, you have to stay positive, otherwise you'll literally fall over.
100%,
Yeah.
100%. No, truly. It's like in the Matrix, you know, when Morpheus tells Neo, you got to fear, doubt, disbelieve, you got to free your mind. 100%, that's related to life, 100%. Because if you're running on the streets, for example, and you're going to do a jump, any bit of doubt that you have inside, forget it. You know what I mean? You're going to be running with your face in the concrete. But you gotta have that, and that just comes over time. That just comes by repetition and just, you know, constantly doing the movements and whatnot. But you start small and you don't try to take a bigger bite of the pie than you can manage. Do you understand? So you start small. A lot of people get discouraged because they jump straight into the deep end. They see us on YouTube and whatnot doing big jumps and flips and movements, and they think, yeah, that's what we want to do. They come, they try it, they hurt themselves, and they go home forever. Yeah. And we never see them again. You know what I'm saying? But you got to start small, start baby steps.
Do you have any disclaimers before your videos? Do not try this at home.
No, please try it at home. Please try it. Please.
I wanted to have a look at quickly one of the projects, many projects that Nakkiah has been working on as well, because I'm aware that time is quickly running out. We've got a little short of Blackie Brown, which maybe we can talk about it after we have a look at it, and you might guess some of the references here.
Yeah, it's just a bit of a play.
So Blackie Brown,
Yeah.
bit of Australian blaxploitation going on in your world right now.
Yeah, I guess the reason I showed that is because, you know, I do work across, I work across a few different mediums within screen and theatre, and, you know, I kind of do like TV and like shows and stuff like that. So I'm kind of used to working within big machines, and the reason I showed this was because it's a project that is like more of an independent thing that's like a little bit of a passion project. And what it is it's like that's a bit of a play we had one day with a green screen. I'm wanting to do like a live action comic. So like a theatre show with two people and an animated screen playing like a multitude of characters as one woman the woman Blackie Brown seeks revenge on the great ancestors of the white men who killed her tribe by killing all of them. Yeah.
How important was it to get those particular aesthetics right? Because there's a lot going on there. There's almost like a kind of decoupage thing going on with different, Aboriginal heroes there, and then obviously there's like the cartoon element, the animation, as well as live action. How much thought went into the sort of aesthetic you wanted to tell this story?
Oh gosh, not enough when you start doing it. You think you know, and then you're like all of a sudden it's like, oh God. We worked with an animation company called Wow in Melbourne. I wrote the script. I then, kind of reworked the script with two actors and a writer, another director. And I'm the writer, that's the director. And so I kind of knew I wanted it to be a show that could tour. and could maybe have a life outside of theatre, even though it's something that I want people to be able to. I had this image of like there being like an animated world, and then at the end, when it's a battle between this white man and this black woman, that we actually just see two people kind of beating the shit out of each other, and what it is to like what violence actually is, in this idea of life and death, and to break through the screen. So it won't kind of happen like that, but that idea of a story versus being an active audience member in it, and then what it is to be an audience member watching these stories and exercising judgment and your moral compass, and what does it compass? Sorry, I said compass really weird. So I was interested. I had that kind of image in my head, and I was interested in that dynamic because I think audience, the role of the audience is very important. And so with that, we just kind of worked with. We got the tone of the script, and so often, you know, if the words are right, that then informs all of your, you know, other creative partners in it, and they'll take those words and make it 10 times better.
Is that where it always begins for you? It always has to be, the words have to be right?
Yeah, and I thought with this maybe it wouldn't be like a script work, but no, it's definitely a script work. I like story, and I start writing from hearing voices, and I think words are so incredibly powerful because they can create action in a way, you know. They can be, you know, very unique and flexible and specific to each different person who takes on board or is, you know, part of the activation of the words. So yeah, for me, I was interested in kind of where Australia is at the moment, you know, especially looking at constitutional reform, treaty, you know, and it being a colonial country, and the fact that we've never really kind of reconciled ourselves to the fact we're on stolen land, but not just on stolen land, on land in which people were murdered for. And what is that to exist, and can we ever right that wrong? And what is it to kind of be in a story as a community that has no ending? And so that's, you know, I was interested in that question, and so I wanted to do something that was, you know, I think work for me needs to be joyful and fun. That doesn't mean it can't be serious or political, but I like making people laugh.
Do you see it as a kind of Trojan horse in that way, that you can actually do both and you kind of catch people unawares, invite them into a point of view that maybe they would never have entertained?
Very much so. I think people have so many ideological beliefs and biases that, you know, if you approach them sometimes with an argument, it can be very hard to get through that wall. And even those who want to listen, there's usually biases there that are deeply seated, and that can be even harder to unpick, you know. So I think, you know, laughter or, you know, presenting something and then turning it on its head, if you do that in a way that is well executed and, you know, critical, and it can be so sneaky. Yeah.
Sneaky is good.
Yeah.
We've been talking a lot about things that you have all been making within Australia. For the audience that is here, you know, across Australia, not just here in this room, is Australia a forward-looking country? Is Australia ready for the sort of art that you're all making? Obviously not, because you're going to Manchester in 2 days.
Well, there's certain reasons I'm doing that, but I think, you know, certain parts of Australia are ready for it. So, you know, we live and work mostly regionally in New South Wales, so we're working with particular people out there. So we're working with farmers, regional communities, and so we have our own barriers that we've had to go through in terms of being artists out in that Australian landscape, to try to get to a point where we can have some of these deeper discussions without just the, why the hell are there artists here? What are you really here for? Kind of thing. So, you know, we've done projects where we've had development for a long period of time and we've hidden the word art, you know, through the whole process, and we've advertised a large outcome but haven't used the word art because there's certain people that's scary for. And then they come in to the process or to the outcome, and they participate and they have this amazing experience, and then they realise, oh, that was art. And so then we've infiltrated a little bit.
What about you, Alison? Do you think that people are ready to be stirred up? And do we need to be stirred up?
Yeah, we totally do. Yeah, I think audiences, you know, are much more forward-looking now, I think, than they were when I first started 20 years ago. Especially, I think, you know, in the Aboriginal space, to be honest. You know, like I just sort of think, well, you know, and I can only speak from, I've only been in filmmaking for 3 years, but certainly in architecture and design, you know, we only had probably 2 or 3 of us that started out back in the 90s. And did we get much work? Sort of, but not really. But if you ask any, like we've got a lot more Indigenous architects now, and you know, business is booming. So in that sense, I think, you know, I think the ground is sort of there, quite ripe, I think, for cultural projects. And I think to take cultural projects to the next level, like I think a lot of the stuff that you're doing is, you know, I think, you know, is actually what the next level will be. You know, it's not going to be that just educating audiences about culture at this level. It's more like, let's take the discourse somewhere else, you know, and start talking about some of the hard stuff. I mean, that conversation that happened in Uluru last week, you know, and I was on the expert panel for constitutional recognition when, you know, back in 2011. And back then we sort of thought that the notion of a treaty would just be far too reaching for Australia to swallow. I think it's fantastic that that's actually on the cards now. And I think that there's a lot of people who have, you know, done a lot of hard work to kind of bring that argument into the space and, you know, to make it palatable, you know, for like the rest of Australia. And, you know, so I think that's really encouraging.
Yeah, well, there's been a lot of reflection. Obviously, it's Reconciliation Week this week. There was over the weekend the 50th anniversary of the 67 referendum. There's been a lot of reflection back on the stories, the what has changed, what it hasn't in the last 50 years. But in that, particularly when I was thinking about this discussion today, I was thinking, what are the stories of the past and what should be the stories of the future? What do you think should be the stories of the future? Nakkiah? Ali, what should we be telling, and particularly the stories that we tell the world, not just tell ourselves. What's the Australia that we want to, you know, tell the story of?
Diverse Australia. I mean, you know, I was looking.
But what does diversity mean? Because it's such a.
Yeah, of course. It means different faces on TV and on film and that kind of thing. Just all different faces. I don't know.
I think what your work does, not to interrupt you, speak over you, so please stop me, is that it questions your surrounds. And I think that's what good work should do, is it should question your surrounds. You know, whether that be your physical space, whether that be your, you know, the value system in which your society is founded on, or, you know, whether that be like your ideological or your personal belief. You got to question what's around you. And I think, like, I wouldn't have a career if people weren't willing to listen. And I think that, you know, and sometimes people don't, and sometimes, you know, you face a lot of opposition or whatnot. But I think it's also about kind of taking that risk and by questioning surrounds and questioning yourself. If you believe in the work that you have to say, then, you know, you're not special. No one's that special that nobody else has had that thought that they haven't had themselves. And that's what I think, you know, personally with my work. I'm like, well, if I'm thinking it, then other people are going to be curious about this as well, right? And so it's just a question of interrogation. And I honestly think that, you know, as Australian people have always been, you know, despite, you know, our kind of, you know, our, you know, racist past and then quite, you know, colonial imperialist past or whatnot, to go into it. As a people, I think we've always been, you know, interested in hearing stories. And I just think now in terms of where we are as a society, we're hungry for stories. That's why we have Instagram stories on everything, right? Like, people want to be seen and people want to hear stuff. Like, we want to consume and we're very smart at it.
Do you think that having that curiosity as well is what enables you all to be fluid in your practice? That things will, you know, the very fact that you're always going to be questioning means you'll always be moving, you'll always be shape-shifting, for lack of a better word?
I think in terms of our practice, that because we're working with community and people, that's always moving and always changing. So, you know, no community is the same, and even within a community, there are communities. You know, if you work with a farming community, it's not just about, you know, you have issues of gender within that farming community. You have relationships where we are from with the Aboriginal community there, and those relations with white colonising farmers who have been there for many generations, and Aboriginal people who have been there for many more generations. So, you know, it's such a diverse kind of range of issues that you start coming across when you're working in that sort of space ethically, that you must be fluid, because you have to be responding to the things you're saying, and even allowing time to not have a response but just let those things sit, to enable you to be guided through them to find something. And often that is an unknown and scary space. And I think part of what artists who work in these sort of areas do is to be comfortable in that unknown, scary space.
Comfortable in the unknown. Sounds like a very cozy place to be. I think we have time for a few more questions, but not from me, from you guys. We're going to be wrapping up soon, and there's some food that will be provided for free. Enjoy that, and also you can grab a drink at the bar. But if anybody had any questions for any of our panellists today, do you want to just put your hand up and we can, just over here. Just wait for the mic.
Yeah, thank you. A very interesting panel session. I just want to pick up on something that Nakkiah said, that you want your work to have a life beyond the theatre. And I took that to mean, kind of cinema and conventional theatre. And I got to thinking that Ali, Alison and Nakkiah didn't really talk about any other platforms to get the work out. And I understand that there are problems with making a buck and wanting to monetize on the work you do. But could any of the three of you comment on other platforms rather than the more traditional, theatre, if you like?
Do you mean theatre as in stage theatre or movie theatre?
Movie theatre, stage theatre.
Okay.
I guess I'm kind of curious about, are any of you working towards using alternative platforms, digital platforms or whatever?
That's an interesting question. When I said like a life beyond the theatre, I didn't necessarily mean like just through film. I'd love to learn how to monetize my work for $1 because I wouldn't have holes in my jeans. But I think, part of what I do, I do have a very strong online presence. A lot of that's due to procrastination. But I have a huge part of that is also due to when I first started working, I won some awards very early on in my career, and so I'd have to get photographed. And I realised that they would do 3 things. So I was always like having to be put in front of a brick wall, like a graffitied brick wall for photos. I'd always get told to look up to the sky and look hopeful. And it was always this idea of like you're a leader, and that word got placed on me very early on in my life. I don't believe in leadership. I think leading is doing, and if you do something, I believe in activism, right? And so I kind of resisted that really early on, and so I took to Twitter and to Facebook and started just talking about my sex life and being irrelevant and trying to provoke in different ways because I didn't want people to see me as this one thing, and that Aboriginal people have 2 narratives. And that is like the good Aboriginal person and the bad Aboriginal person. I want to add complexity there. So in terms of, that might not be part of my practices in writing, but my God, has that presence, that online presence helped me make space for my work. And I like to think that it's, made space for other Aboriginal people to be heard as well. So I guess, in terms of, I'm not using VR or anything, but, I'll use anything to be heard.
The only thing I'd like to say is that I think, just coming from working in the built environment for so long, I'm, working with the public art panels around there at Barangaroo and stuff like that, I do think that there is a lot of opportunity, like with convergence of the built environment and a lot of art forms. Supercritical Mass is a really great example of a fantastic group using sound in the built environment and live performance in the built environment. But I think that, that's pretty underexplored, really. And have I figured out a way of converging film and architecture? No. But I'm thinking about it. And I think the augmented reality sort of opportunities there and the convergence of, especially like if I've designed this chair, especially in the Aboriginal belief of objects as being that there are no inanimate objects. Objects have the life force of the creator, the ancestors that we're channeling through that artist and that creator to make that thing. I think there's so many, the materials that it's made out of, the artist, what the artist was thinking when they were drawing that particular motif. I mean, there's so many layers of stories to be told through physical objects that I do think that there's massive opportunity through song, poetry, film, with the physical world, really.
The world is literally your oyster.
Yeah, I don't really have I'm scared of online world, but I'm 42, so I just haven't,
You got to get working on your personal brand, Alison.
Right.
Are there any other questions? I think we have time for one or two more. Just down the front here.
Hi, I know this is a kind of forum for Ratbag, so I shall be an elderly Ratbag. I'm a lot older than you. Okay. One of the things I do is that I talk internationally about using non-linear multiple storyline narrative in AR and VR and the cross between film and theatre and games. I have been doing a lot of work in Europe, talking to people in small countries in Europe who are really into VR and AR. And I'd be saying, thank you so much for all they've been terribly interesting, but you can take over the world online. This is the time now. VR is on the edge of taking off. And I think all of you should really be not thinking just of, the smaller environs here, but of what you can do over there, because that's what they're thinking. And really, we are ideally placed. You can do stuff in your garage. Ali, you're doing stuff with handheld. Why not? And I would love to say, get out there and do it. We don't have to say about, think about worry about this, this sort of only our own preconceptions. We see the world through a certain kind of view. Take it out there. Seize it. It's not to be frightened of if I can do it, for God's sake. I'm working in VR, so you can, and I would encourage you to do so because you're doing wonderful things. So, forgive my ratbaggery, my geriatric ratbaggery, but it's out there and you better get onto it.
She wants to give you lots and lots of money to do it as well, guys.
Hurry up.
Do we have time for one more question down the front? Yep.
This is for Ali. I know you make movement videos and now you're writing screenplays. How are you going to transition from making movement videos into story literal form like literature, you know what I mean? And how is that transition working right now?
Yeah, baby steps. 5-minute video, 10-minute video, feature film.
Delete that
That's
big
the
leap.
aim. Yeah. What is a feature film? It's a 90-minute film made of 10-minute segments.
It's true.
Do you know what I'm saying?
You sound like a
10-minute
personal
short
trainer.
films. Hey, yeah. Get down. Yeah. So I see everything in pictures. I see everything in break it down. Everything you break it down. So I can already see the visions of 5 feature films in my head. Now I just gotta put it out on paper and then storyboard them. I storyboard myself. I shot list myself. Everything. So yeah, I don't want to. I have to. Yeah.
I think that what I've gotten from tonight is that anything is possible. All of these people in front of me are proof of that. They put their heart into everything that they do and do it with conviction and total clarity. And I'm so excited about seeing all of the work and hearing all of the work that you do in the coming months and years. Can you please join me in thanking Alison, Ali, Nakkiah and Vic for joining us today.